A broke single dad trudges through a torrential downpour to fix a stranded luxury car, dreading his upcoming blind date. He had no idea the fiery, intimidating woman behind the wheel was a cutthroat billionaire CEO, and the exact same woman he was praying he wouldn't have to meet. Oliver Hayes stared at his reflection in the cracked rearview mirror of his 2004 Ford F-150. He adjusted the collar of a navy suit that was at least 5 years out of date and smelt faintly of sawdust and motor oil. At 32, Oliver was a single father, a master carpenter, and a man drowning under the crushing weight of medical debt left behind by his late wife. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was his entire world. But surviving on a blue-collar salary in Seattle was a daily war. Tonight, he was losing a battle. His overbearing but well-meaning older sister, Beatrice, had finally bullied him into a blind date. "You need to live, Oliver," Beatrice had scolded him over the phone that morning. "Her name is Victoria. She's a friend of my boss. A bit intense, but she's successful. She works in corporate acquisitions. Just one drink. If she's a nightmare, you can fake a stomachache." Oliver dreaded it. He imagined a sterile, humorless woman in a grey pantsuit who drank martinis dry and fired people for sport. He was a guy with calloused hands and a bank account constantly hovering near zero. She was a corporate shark. The mismatch was blaring, but he had promised Beatrice he would try. Miles away, in the penthouse overlooking the glittering city skyline, Victoria Kensington was having a similar crisis. At 30, Victoria was the CEO and sole heir of Kensington Global, a multi-billion-dollar logistics and tech conglomerate. She was ruthless in the boardroom, famously icy to the press, and entirely isolated in her personal life. She hadn't been on a date in 4 years. "I am not going, Samantha," Victoria snapped, pacing the hardwood floor in her bespoke charcoal dress. Her best friend, Samantha, casually sipped champagne on Victoria's velvet sofa. "You are going. You just finalized a $600 million merger, Vic. You are vibrating with stress. You need to talk to a human being who doesn't report to you. His name is Oliver. He builds things with his hands. He's normal, grounding. He probably expects me to pay for dinner, Sam. Or he'll want seed money for some terrible app idea." Victoria sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I detest blind dates. Just 1 hour. I'd Laura downtown. If he's awful, text me your code word and I'll call you with an emergency." An hour later, the skies over Seattle ripped open. A torrential, blinding rainstorm turned the evening commute into a chaotic crawl. Oliver was navigating the slick curves of Highway 99, the wipers of his old Ford struggling to keep up with the deluge. He was already running late, his anxiety spiking with every passing minute. He hated being late even for a date he didn't want to attend. Suddenly, through the heavy curtain of rain, the glow of hazard lights caught his eye. Pulled over on the narrow, treacherous shoulder of the highway was a sleek, silver Aston Martin. Steam was billowing violently from beneath the hood, blowing eerily in the headlights of passing cars. Standing next to it, huddled under a flimsy designer umbrella that was losing a war against the wind, was a woman. Oliver's conscience flared. The road was dangerous, visibility was terrible, and she was practically standing in the lane of traffic. He glanced at his dashboard clock. 7:15 p.m. The reservation was for 7:30. If he stopped, he'd be late. Worse, he'd be soaked and filthy. "Damn it," Oliver muttered. He couldn't leave someone stranded in this weather. He pulled his heavy truck over, the tires crunching against the gravel, and threw on his hazard lights to shield the Aston Martin from the oncoming traffic. He grabbed a heavy canvas jacket from the passenger seat, pulled it over his head, and stepped out into the freezing downpour. As Oliver approached, Victoria was practically shaking with rage. Her phone had died exactly 2 minutes after the engine had violently overheated and sputtered to a halt. She was freezing, her silk dress clinging to her legs, and her patience had completely evaporated. She turned sharply as Oliver approached, her eyes narrowing. She saw a tall, broad-shouldered man emerging from a battered pickup truck. Instantly, her defensive walls slammed into place. "If you're a tow truck, you're severely under-equipped," Victoria shouted over the roar of the rain and passing cars. "Just a guy who doesn't want to see you get sideswiped by a semi-truck," Oliver yelled back, stepping into the glow of her headlights. He pushed wet, dark hair out of his eyes. What happened? The car made a sound like a dying metallic wail. The temperature gauge spiked to the maximum and smoke started pouring out. "That's my expert diagnosis," Victoria said, her tone dripping with sarcastic frustration. Oliver couldn't help but crack a small smile. Despite the soaked clothes and the furious blare, she was undeniably striking. "Sounds like a blown radiator hose or a cracked water pump. Pop the hood. Let me look." So, I'll speak. "Are you a mechanic or just a good Samaritan with a death wish?" she asked, hesitating. "I've kept a 2004 Ford alive for 20 years, Oliver replied. "I'm basically a wizard. Pop the hood, miss." Victoria retreated to the driver's seat and pulled the lever. The hood popped up and Oliver carefully lifted it, waving away the thick cloud of hot steam. He pulled a small pen light from his jacket pocket and leaned over the complex, high-end engine block. "Well, there's your problem," Oliver said after a minute, coughing slightly from the antifreeze fumes. He pointed the light down toward the bottom of the radiator. "Upper coolant hose completely split. Looks like a clamp failed and the pressure just blew the rubber wide open. Your engine is bone dry." "Wonderful," Victoria groaned, stepping closer, holding the umbrella over both of them. She shivered as the icy wind cut through her coat. "Can you fix it?" "Properly?" "No. I need a new hose and a gallon of coolant." "But," Oliver looked back at his truck, then at her shivering frame, "I can redneck engineer it enough to get you to the gas station 2 miles up the road, where you can safely wait for a flatbed. If you stay here, someone is going to crash into you." "Do what you have to do," she said. Oliver jogged back to his truck and returned a moment later with a roll of heavy-duty, heat-resistant silicone tape, a utility knife, and 2 large gallon jugs of distilled water. Victoria watched him work. He was fast, efficient, and completely unbothered by the miserable conditions. He wrapped the split hose tightly, his large, scarred hands moving with practiced precision. For a woman used to men who delegated every physical task to an underling, there was something intensely captivating about watching him fix the problem with bare hands and sheer competence. "You're getting grease all over your suit," Victoria noted. Oliver chuckled, a warm, deep sound that cut through the noise of the storm. "Yeah, well, it wasn't a very good suit to begin with. And honestly, it gives me a great excuse for tonight." "A hot date?" Victoria asked, raising an eyebrow. "A blind date," Oliver corrected, grimacing as he tightened a makeshift clam. "Set up by my sister, supposed to be meeting some terrifying corporate executive. I'm a carpenter. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I figured I'd sit there, let her judge my tax bracket, and politely excuse myself after the appetizers." Victoria laughed, a genuine, surprising sound that warmed Oliver's chest. "I feel your pain. I'm currently missing a blind date myself. My friend forced me into it. Supposedly, he's a salt-of-the-earth type who works with his hands. I assume he's going to spend the evening complaining about the economy and asking me to spit a plate of cheap pasta." Oliver grinned, glancing up at her. "Hey now, we salt-of-the-earth types have a lot of charm, and we know how to use duct tape." Victoria smiled back, the tension in her shoulders finally dropping. Einstein corrected, "You're certainly coming in handy." "Nah. "All right," Oliver said, stepping back and wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his pocket. He poured the water into the radiator, watching it gurgle down. "That tape will hold the pressure, but barely. Keep the heater blasted on full hot draws heat away from the engine. Drive no faster than 30 miles an hour. Pull into the Chevron station at the next exit and call a tow." Victoria reached into her designer purse and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. She extracted 3 crisp $100 bills and held them out to him. "Thank you. Truly. You saved me from a very dangerous night." Oliver looked at the money, then up at her eyes. They were sharp, intelligent, and a striking shade of hazel. For a split second, the difference in their worlds vanished. He gently pushed her hand away. "Keep it. Just pay it forward." Or, he smirked. "Just don't be too hard on the guy you're meeting tonight. He's probably just as nervous as you are." Victoria felt a strange flutter in her chest. She slowly put the money away. "I'll keep that in mind. Good luck with your corporate tyrant." "Good luck with your cheap pasta," Oliver replied. He waited until she started the Aston Martin, watching the engine hold steady, and followed her slowly down the highway until she safely pulled into the brightly lit gas station. With a quick honk of his horn, Oliver merged back onto the highway, heading the gas. He was incredibly late, 7:55 p.m. Oliver practically ran through the heavy oak doors of Laura, Seattle's most exclusive French restaurant. He was a disaster. The bottom of his suit pants was soaked. There was a visible smear of black grease on his white shirt collar, and his hair was wildly disheveled from the rain. The maître d'hôtel, a man whose posture suggested he had swallowed a steel rod, looked Oliver up and down with barely concealed disdain. "May I help you, monsieur?" "I have a reservation." "Oh, I'm meeting someone who does." "And of the name Kensington?" Oliver panted, trying to wipe a droplet of dirty water from his forehead. The maître d'hôtel's eyes widened slightly at the name. Yes. Mademoiselle Kensington arrived 15 minutes ago. She requested a private booth in the back. Right this way." Oliver took a deep breath, preparing for the condescending glare of a woman who was probably already furious at his tardiness. He followed the host through the dimly lit, opulent dining room, the crystal chandeliers mocking his ruined suit. They approached a velvet-lined booth. A woman was sitting with her back to them, sipping a glass of red wine. She had taken off her coat, revealing a stunning, elegant charcoal dress. "Mademoiselle Kensington," the maître d'hôtel murmured politely. "Your guest has arrived." The woman turned around. Oliver froze. The air in his lungs evaporated. Victoria lowered her wine glass, her hazel eyes widening in absolute shock as she took in the tall, broad-shouldered man standing before her. She saw the damp hair. She saw the grease smear on his collar. "You," Victoria breathed, the pieces falling into place with dizzying speed. "The Aston Martin," Oliver said, his voice barely a whisper, staring at the billionaire CEO he had just saved on the side of the highway. The maître d'hôtel stood frozen, his eyes darting between the immaculately dressed billionaire and the grease-stained carpenter. He cleared his throat, clearly unsure if he should call security or pour the water. "Is there a problem, Mademoiselle Kensington?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Victoria stared at Oliver, the remnants of her roadside frustration completely evaporating, replaced by a bubbling, irrepressible sense of amusement. The sheer absurdity of the universe had just smacked her directly in the face. "No, François," Victoria said, a wide, breathtaking smile breaking across her face. "There is absolutely no problem. Please bring us a bottle of the 2015 Chateau Margaux, and maybe a damp cloth for my date." Oliver slid into the plush velvet booth opposite her, shaking his head in disbelief. He looked down at his ruined suit and then up at the woman who controlled a global empire. "I have to say, Victoria, if I knew the woman in the Aston Martin was the terrifying corporate shark my sister warned me about, I might have used cheaper tape." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and uninhibited, drawing a few curious glances from the neighboring tables. "And if I had known my salt-of-the-earth blind date was the man currently wearing half my radiator fluid, I wouldn't have offered him $300 on the side of Highway 99. The ice wasn't just broken, it was completely shattered. As François poured the incredibly expensive red wine, the usual suffocating awkwardness of a first date vanished. They had already seen each other in a crisis. The pretentious masks that people wear to impress one another were entirely useless now. "So," Victoria said, leaning forward, resting her chin on her hand. Her hazel eyes locked onto his. "Tell me about the real Oliver Hayes. Because my friend Samantha gave me a very brief resume. Master carpenter, single dad, hates the wealthy." "I don't hate the wealthy," Oliver corrected gently, taking a sip of the wine and raising his eyebrows at the incredible taste. "I just live in a different reality. I build custom cabinetry and frame houses in Bellevue. I wake up at 5 a.m., make pancakes for my 6-year-old daughter Lily, and try to figure out how to chip away at the mountain of medical bills my late wife left behind from her treatments at Providence Swedish Medical Center." The playful glint in Victoria's eyes softened into genuine empathy. "I'm so sorry, Oliver. That's an incredibly heavy burden to carry alone." "It's life," Oliver said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet honorability. "It's hard, but Lily makes it worth it. She's got a missing front tooth and an obsession with dinosaurs that borders on terrifying. What about you? What does the CEO of Kensington Global actually do when she's not blowing up luxury cars in the rain?" Victoria sighed, swirling the dark red liquid in her glass. "She works, and then she works some more. My father built the company from the ground up, and when he passed away 4 years ago, the board of directors looked at me like I was a little girl playing dress-up. I had to become ruthless just to survive them. I manage supply chains, I negotiate mergers with companies like Vanguard Logistics, and I spend 90% of my time making sure men twice my age don't steal my father's legacy." "Sounds lonelier than framing a house at midnight," Oliver observed astutely. Victoria looked at him, truly looked at him. No man had ever dared to call her lonely to her face. They were either intimidated by her power or trying to siphon it. But Oliver was just looking at her like a human being. Their dinner arrived, a meticulously plated duck confit for her, and a hearty braised short rib for him. The conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from Oliver's woodworking projects to Victoria's secret love of terrible, low-budget sci-fi movies. But the bubble of their perfect evening was about to be punctured. "Well, well, Victoria Kensington." A slick, drawling voice cut through the ambient jazz of the restaurant. Victoria's posture instantly stiffened. Oliver looked up to see a man in a bespoke Tom Ford suit holding a martini. He had the kind of perfectly coiffed hair and smug expression that practically screamed trust fund arrogance. "Preston," Victoria said, her voice dropping 10 degrees. What an unpleasant surprise. Preston Croft was a hedge fund manager for Sterling Partners, and a man who had unsuccessfully tried to acquire one of Victoria's subsidiaries the previous year. He sneered, his eyes drifting over to Oliver. He took in the damp, outdated jacket, the calloused hands, and the unmistakable smear of black grease on Oliver's collar. "Slumming it tonight, Vic?" Preston asked, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Did your driver need a +1, or is the company's diversity initiative extending to the homeless now?" Oliver's jaw tightened. He had dealt with wealthy, entitled clients before, but the blatant disrespect made his blood run hot. He placed his napkin on the table, preparing to stand up and escort Preston away from their table. But Victoria beat him to it. She stood up slowly, picking up her wine glass. She didn't raise her voice, but the sheer freezing authority in her tone made the surrounding tables fall dead silent. "Preston," she said, her voice like cut glass, "this man has more integrity, skill, and value in his grease-stained hands than you have in your entire offshore portfolio. If you ever speak to him or look at him with that tone again, I will personally make it my mission to short every single stock your firm holds until you are begging for a job at my loading docks in Tacoma. Do you understand me?" Preston's smug smile vanished, his face turning an ugly shade of red. He opened his mouth to speak, but the absolute murder in Victoria's eyes stopped him. He swallowed hard, turned on his heel, and practically fled the restaurant. Victoria sat back down, taking a calm sip of her wine. She looked at Oliver, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Sorry, I have a very low tolerance for bullies. Oliver stared at her, thoroughly impressed and undeniably captivated. "Remind me never to negotiate a contract against you." "You shouldn't," she smiled, reaching across the table. For the first time all night she gently touched his hand, tracing the rough calluses with her soft thumb. "I always win." 6 months later, the world had caught on. The media dubbed it the billionaire's blue-collar romance. The Seattle Times ran a front-page feature, and Page 6 published grainy paparazzi photos of Victoria Kensington in a pair of faded jeans and a baseball cap, sitting in the bleachers of a community park watching Oliver's daughter Lily play youth soccer. To Oliver and Victoria, the relationship was a sanctuary. Oliver brought warmth, stability, and unpretentious honesty to Victoria's chaotic, high-stakes life. Victoria brought Oliver a fierce loyalty and a profound sense of partnership he hadn't felt in years. She adored Lily, and Lily thought Victoria was a real-life superhero who just happened to wear very nice shoes. But in the cutthroat world of corporate logistics, their happiness was viewed as a vulnerability. Charles Harrington, the chief operating officer of Kensington Global, had been eyeing the CEO chair for years. Charles was a relic of Victoria's father's era, a ruthless traditional businessman who despised answering to a young woman. With a massive billion-dollar expansion of their warehouse infrastructure looming, Charles saw his opportunity. He began whispering to the board of directors, planting seeds of doubt. He claimed Victoria was distracted. He leaked fabricated stories to the Business Journal, suggesting that her bizarre obsession with a local handyman was clouding her judgment and making her erratic. The climax came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Victoria had called an emergency board meeting in the glass-walled conference room of the Kensington Tower. She had spent the last week reviewing Charles' proposed budgets for the new Pacific Northwest warehouses, and something felt terribly wrong, though she couldn't pinpoint it. Oliver had dropped by her office to bring her a coffee, knowing she had been up until 3 a.m. stressing over the numbers. He sat on her leather sofa, quietly looking over a duplicate set of the architectural plans and material manifests that were spread across her coffee table. "Charles is calling for a vote of no confidence today," Victoria said, pacing the floor, her voice tight with exhaustion. "He's convinced the board that his budget saves the company $80 million. If I block it without proof of why it's flawed, they'll oust me. He's framing me as an emotional, out-of-touch liability. Oliver frowned, running a rough finger down the itemized list of building materials on Charles' proposal. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Vic," Oliver said quietly, "come look at this." Victoria stopped pacing and walked over, peering over his shoulder. "What is it?" "I've run those numbers through 3 different accounting algorithms. The math checks out." "The math might," Oliver said, tapping the paper, "but the physics don't. Look at the supplier Charles is insisting on for the structural framing. Apex Industrial Steel." "Yes, they offered a bid 30% lower than our usual suppliers," she replied. "Victoria, I frame houses for a living, but I know commercial building codes," Oliver said, his tone turning dead serious. "Apex doesn't manufacture load-bearing, high-tensile steel. They manufacture light gauge metal for temporary structures and non-load-bearing interior partitions. If Charles uses this steel to build 50,000-square-foot logistical hubs, the roofs will collapse under the weight of the first heavy Seattle snowstorm." Victoria's breath hitched. She grabbed the paper. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Oliver said. "And look at the sealant and insulation specs. It's totally non-compliant with OSHA fire safety regulations for commercial warehousing. This isn't a cost-saving measure, Victoria. This is a deliberate sabotage of infrastructure." Victoria's mind raced, her CEO instincts snapping violently into place. Why would he risk a collapse? Because he's not planning on being caught," Oliver said, pulling out his phone and doing a quick search. "Let me guess. Apex Industrial Steel is a subsidiary of a holding company." Victoria ran to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the corporate registry. A fierce, predatory smile slowly spread across her face. A holding company registered in the Cayman Islands, with a primary stakeholder listed as Charles Harrington's brother-in-law. He's embezzling the $80 million, Oliver stated. He's buying cheap, illegal materials from his own shadow company, pocketing the difference and leaving Kensington Global with warehouses that are ticking time bombs. An hour later, the boardroom was packed. 12 powerful men and women sat around the mahogany table. Charles Harrington stood at the head of the room, looking incredibly smug, preparing to deliver the final blow to Victoria's career. "The fact is, ladies and gentlemen," Charles boomed, "our CEO is distracted. Her personal life has become a public spectacle, and she is blocking a budget that will save this company millions. It is time for a change in leadership." The boardroom door swung open. Victoria walked in, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying power. She didn't look distracted. She looked like an executioner. Walking a half step behind her, carrying a thick stack of manila folders, was Oliver Hayes. He wasn't wearing a grease-stained suit today. He was wearing a sharp-tailored charcoal suit that Victoria had bought him, and he looked every bit as imposing as the executives in the room. "What is the meaning of this?" Charles demanded, his face flushing. "This is a closed board meeting. Non-personnel are not permitted." "Mr. Hayes is not non-personnel today, Charles," Victoria said coldly, taking her seat at the head of the table. "He is acting as an independent structural consultant, and he has just saved this company from a multi-billion-dollar federal indictment." Victoria snapped her fingers. Oliver calmly walked around the table, dropping a thick folder in front of every board member. "Inside those folders," Victoria announced, her voice ringing off the glass walls, "you will find a complete breakdown of the materials our esteemed COO proposed for our new expansion. You will also find a cross-reference proving that those materials violate 7 distinct federal building codes." The board members opened the folders, their eyes widening as they read Oliver's highlighted notes. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, her eyes locking onto Charles, who had suddenly gone ashen pale, "you will find bank records linking the supplier Apex Steel directly to offshore accounts controlled by Charles's family. He isn't saving us money. He's building structurally compromised death traps and stealing the budget difference." The room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted, demanding answers. Charles stammered, backing away from the table, but the evidence was irrefutable. It was written in black and white, caught by the trained eye of a man who actually knew how things were built. By the end of the day, Charles Harrington was escorted out of the building by corporate security, pending federal fraud charges. The board of directors, previously skeptical of Victoria, unanimously voted to grant her full executive control of the upcoming expansion. That evening, the penthouse was quiet. The rain had returned to Seattle, beating softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria stood looking out over the glittering city lights, a glass of champagne in her hand. The weight of the world which she had carried alone for so long felt incredibly light. She felt strong arms wrap around her waist from behind. Oliver rested his chin on her shoulder, pressing a soft kiss to her neck. "Not a bad day at the office," Oliver murmured. "I couldn't have done it without you," Victoria said softly, leaning back into his solid chest. "You saved me, Oliver, again." "Well," Oliver smiled, turning her around to face him. He looked deep into her hazel eyes, no longer seeing a terrifying billionaire but the woman he loved. "I am a handyman, Vic. Fixing things is what I do." Victoria reached up, pulling him down for a deep, lingering kiss. Two vastly different worlds had collided on a stormy highway, but as they stood together above the city, they knew they had built something completely unbreakable. Did Oliver and Victoria's incredible collision of worlds leave you speechless? Sometimes the universe has a funny way of giving us exactly what we need, precisely when we least expect it. If you loved this story of love, loyalty, and shattered expectations, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true romance still exists. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing real-life stories.